Hello and welcome to the Crux of MedTech. We go beyond the buzzwords, bringing you the insights from the innovators, investors, and leaders who are driving this life-saving space forward. Because I'm absolutely fascinated by the stories that people have to tell in MedTech. As someone who works in this sector on a daily basis, I come across so many interesting people and so many interesting stories that I think the world deserves to know about. Welcome to the Crux of MedTech.
First of all, Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So I'm really excited to do this because this week you have just announced the acquisition of your company Vivasure to Haemonetics. So first of all, congratulations. And second of all, how did that come about? And let's talk about the story.
Yeah, wow, it's quite a story. Haemonetics had an option to buy us when they made their Series D investment a few years ago. And really conditionally, they were looking for us to run a US pivotal trial, develop our next generation product. And we did that. And then they triggered the option late last year. And then we closed this past week. So it's been quite a journey. So I joined the company in 2020. And then one of the first mandates the board gave me was to go out and raise a Series D. And we got an initial investment from another strategic, and then that led to us to go try and find somebody who helped fund our US pivotal. We actually had a couple term sheets from Asia that we really liked with some non-dilutive payments for rights. The board liked them, but it wasn't an exit. And then Haemonetics called and said, hey, look, we just bought a company that's very similar to yours in small hole closure. You're in large hole closure. We're interested in partnering, but we're not going to make an investment unless we have rights to acquisition. And the board was very excited about this. A lot of the investors have been in the company for quite some time. And they liked the idea, look, this led to an acquisition, right? So a strategic investment from Asia would have led to, okay, finishing a pivotal and then running a process. But this led to an actual acquisition. And Haemonetics is a great partner. They really believe in our space. They really like the technology. I think they're going to do extremely well with the product. So it was a good fit. And that's how it all came about, more or less.
Excellent. And we're going to dissect all of that later into this conversation. But first of all, how did you get into the devices industry?
Yeah, so when I went to business school in Boston, I was always interested in healthcare. I had done healthcare consulting, hospital consulting before business school. I was an engineer by training. I really thought I was going to go work in pharmaceuticals, actually. And then I went to business school and did a project on medical device adoption. So some medical devices have fantastic clinical data, but turn out they don't really get adopted. You know, the penetration is in single digits and is not really used. And then some devices have really kind of not so great clinical data, but go like gangbusters. And so I was looking at drug-eluting stents as an example of something that took off really, really fast. And comparing that to some other technologies in interventional cardiology at the time. And I was going down to the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. I'd have to get up. It was terrible in Boston. It was like 6 a.m. in January. It was so cold. I'd never been so cold in my life. Get down there, and the guys were great. The physicians really liked what I was looking at and curious about the project. And some of the clinicians, they were like, hey, why don't you get involved in medical devices? And I was like, oh, okay. At the time, there's a company called Guidant, which some people probably know back in the 90s was a bit of a legend, spun out of Eli Lilly. And some of the guys said, hey, look, they have a very innovative drug-eluting stent that's coming. Why don't you look at that? And so my first job out of business school was at Guidant in California as a product manager for drug-eluting stents. And so I did join Guidant, but then about a year or so later, we were bought by Abbott Laboratories, and as a part of that acquisition. So I spent my time at Abbott Laboratories, 15 years in total. I had a variety of roles. Obviously, product management was one. And then I did something I think is really good for people who want to be in medical devices. I took a sales job. I had a territory which, when I joined, the territory was doing about $2 million in sales. When I left, we were doing about $10 million in sales. It was quite the ride. Put on 15 pounds, I wasn't sleeping well, but it was a pure adrenaline rush. And you really learn, I think, about medical devices by being in sales, and you seeing the products be used, and you see the dynamics in the hospital of your product being used. And I think sometimes we forget like all these different dynamics when we're developing them, and we have this kind of view of the world. But I think that experience was extremely helpful for me. I joined Abbott Ventures as one of the first employees. So we made equity investments for Abbott in new technologies, which got me fascinated in startups. And then I had a variety of roles. So I was in Asia for 4 years or so. And then Abbott sent me to manage a business here in Europe. And then in 2020, Vivasure called and said, hey, look, we're looking for a CEO. Would you be interested? Closure was an area that was exploding because of all of these large hole applications in structural heart. And I thought the technology was really fascinating. So I said, let's go. And that's how it happened.
Epic. And so there's a couple of things on the Abbott journey I wanted to dive into. So first of all, with the ventures side of things. So why did you get involved with that? Like, were you approached about the ventures side, or did you actively seek it out to try and
Yeah,
get
no,
exposure?
I was approached. They were looking for essentially smart people to help build relationships with a lot of these up and coming emerging technologies. The idea for strategic, at least as Abbott, was to make an equity investment, follow the technology for a few years, and then jump in a big way to build a foundational business. And they wanted, Abbott's a big company. They want billion-dollar businesses, right? So for trying to find the next billion-dollar business and be on the cutting edge of that for their growth. And this was a time right after the financial crash when it was a tough market for medical devices. Venture funds were having a hard time raising money. And since they're having a hard time raising money, they're putting less money to work. Timelines are becoming larger and longer in the sense that, what used to be a 510K was now becoming a class 3 PMA approval with the FDA. And so the returns were becoming more difficult, and as such, you had that dynamic, and hence as a strategic who came in, I don't think I've ever been so popular in my life. I'd show up like, hey, we're interested in your company. They'd be like, great. Everyone laughed at my jokes. It was a good time because there was such a lack of capital flowing into medical devices at the time. There was no IPO market, so people were really struggling to see what the exits on a lot of these technologies would be. So yeah, that's how I got into it and did, I think over the period of 2.5 years, we did 6 or 7 investments under my watch. Yeah.
Cool. What were some of those investments?
Yeah, so we did investments in interventional pulmonology. A company was eventually acquired by Boston Scientific. We did investments in actually some structural heart ancillary devices that panned out. We did investments in atrial fibrillation mapping. We did investments in atrial fibrillation catheter. So yeah, mostly in cardiology were a lot of the different investments that we did. Some of them didn't pan out, some did, but that's the nature of venture investing, right?
100%. You've got to expect less work out than do work out in the world of startup. So with the pulmonary one where it goes to Boston Scientific, how do you feel as someone who invested through Abbott? Is that a win because you made them pay a premium price for it at Boston, or is it a loss because you lose the technology?
Yeah, I think obviously it's a win because there's a financial return for that. I forgot what it was, 2 or 3x of what we put in. But it was just generally felt at that time, Boston Scientific actually had a business in interventional pulmonology and actually had a need for it, whereas Abbott did not. And so we were kind of like, look, we're not either going to jump in a big way or we're not going to jump in at all. And I think the decision was made, look, we're just not ready to commit to this type of business, even though there's a lot of synergies with some of the things that we could do from catheters and nitinol, et cetera. But no, it was decided not to jump in. And when I was at Abbott, it's interesting too. Abbott had a small spine business at the time, and orthopedics were at that time quite hot, but the business was small. It was, it was a $200 million business, and that might sound big to us, but to a company like Abbott, it was small potatoes. It wasn't growing tremendously. And it was kind of one of these things, either we go and buy a big company like Zimmer or something and become big in orthopedics, or let's just get out. And the decision was made to get out and sell that business. So there was a lot of strategic decisions that a big company has to make. And when these opportunities come up to acquire something you invested in, it triggers that decision. But many times you'll say no because it's just not a good fit, or the timing's not right, or if you're going to get in, you have to make a huge commitment in terms of time, effort, and resources, and that can be difficult for a big company, right? So it comes back to many times people say, well, why isn't that company answering our phone call? Why aren't they interested in? And I tell guys, look, when you're a startup, the timing isn't always going to be right for them either, right? They've got things going on. There's political dynamics, there's financial dynamics, where the business is, what they're looking for. So, you just have to be patient. And then, out of left field, other people will start to come in. And so really what you need to do as a startup is keep your feelers out there, keep informing strategics, all of them, keep them up to speed. And, things can change quickly, they can move in a different direction. We never would have thought of Haemonetics as a company to buy us when I first joined the company. I mean, it wasn't even on our radar, because you have a banker put together a bunch of lists. You have the list of companies you were thinking of. But they bought a company called Cardiva, which did small hole closure. We had been talking to Cardiva, a great group of guys, and chatting with them, and suddenly they went quiet, and then 2 months later they were acquired. But then that made Haemonetics a player, and then suddenly they became very interested in us, and it made total sense synergistically with what they had. And so, yeah, I think that's just a natural dynamic in a big company is those timings are less predictable. And sometimes you can force a decision based upon data and an outcome or running a process. But other times, they've got other things they've got going on and they have to manage it. And they're looking at lots of companies. And that's where it is. Strategics need startups, right? Because it's a sad fact, but internal R&D is not able to produce the next big thing, right? And have those really high growth rates of 15, 20, 30%. So that's why they need startups to be out there finding. And so they've got a whole team that is dedicated to finding those, right? And so if you're able to grow and demonstrate growth, people are going to be interested because a lot of it is about top line growth in medical devices. And medical devices, our margins are typically 50, 60, 70, 80, sometimes 90%. It's very healthy. And they've got a sales team out there and they've got the capabilities. But so if you got a good product that can grow, it's going to make a lot of sense for them financially.
Indeed. So with the venture side of things, did you have any misses at all where you were like, damn, if we got in there, then we would have really done well?
Yeah, there were several misses where we made investments in certain structural heart and aortic valve technologies that were the wrong ones that didn't pan out. And that's the nature of the beast. And other ones that were eventually acquired by Boston Scientific, we passed on. So there were opportunities out there. And some of these companies you didn't think were going to turn anything did. So Univalve is a great story in transcatheter valve replacement that, 10 years ago it was interesting, it was doing okay, but then they found a really good indication that their product served, went out there, ran a trial, great data, and now they're the only real game in town for that indication. And now they were about to be bought by Edwards for over $1 billion, though that's obviously been put on hold now. But the point being is they're able to create a great value, a great story, even though 10 years ago you wouldn't have thought that to be the case.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Cool. So we're moving on from the venture side. You went and did a stint in the international business.
Yes.
Whereabouts did you go?
I was in China.
China. How did you find that?
China is a fascinating place. So if you were to do the math, a third of the world's smokers are Chinese men, right? In China, there's about, somewhere between 70, 80 million patients with cardiovascular disease, proven cardiovascular disease. That's greater than the population here in Great Britain, right? There's a huge market there. But it's a challenging market. It's a different market. There's a lot of local players. Culturally, it's very different. It is probably the biggest stent market in the world now. It's on its way to be the biggest pacemaker market in the world. But to play and participate there, it's different. It's challenging. And like I say, everyone plays football in this world, but they play different rules of football, right? And the way that they play there is a bit different, and you have to be willing to work with that. And generally, I would say you'd have to find a local partner. So back then, all the big medical device companies, whether it was us as Abbott or Medtronic or Boston Scientific, we were looking to get in a big way into China. Everyone was struggling with the business model, but we were looking at how could we become local, be considered a local player. So we were looking at acquisitions. We were looking at building our own product there. None of it panned out, but that was the vision of why I was sent there to China. So in terms of like investment too, I mean, there's a lot of investors there that are looking to put money, a lot of people interested in bringing technology from the West to China, and several business models of companies that have gone public essentially under that model. So Genesis being I would say the poster board for that. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity that was there. We had to really focus on our own business because of a lot of the dynamics and challenges. So the stent pricing in China was the highest in the world to the distributors, even higher than in Japan. But then, 7 years later, it became like Germany in terms of pricing. It was an incredible drop. And so dynamics there are fast. So I often say in China, a year there is like a dog year. So much can happen in 1 year. We had the whole GlaxoSmithKline dynamic when I was there. So we had salespeople who didn't want to go to the hospital because they were afraid they might get arrested. Those are problems you don't think about here in the West. So
what was that GlaxoSmithKline?
So GlaxoSmithKline was accused by the Chinese government. This is all public. You can go look at it, for bribing clinicians to prescribe their product. And they essentially raided them, and then it became quite a public scene there. And then what that triggered was a lot of investigations by local departments and police into every medical product company, whether it be pharmaceutical or medical device, including us, as to, okay, who are you working with? What's your practices, et cetera. And the way they would do that, sometimes they would just go find sales reps in a hospital and say, hey, come have a coffee with me. Okay. And so you might laugh at that, but that was just the way that these local governments could, they got the message from above. Let's start investigating these companies for corruption. And that's how it started. And obviously, eventually Glaxo was settled with the government, and you can look publicly about all of that, what happened. But that was something that happened in 1 year. That was a few months of dynamics. And then other times in dynamics, you would have distributors, stop selling our product, or you'd be kicked out of a big hospital. So there's always something happening there. Yeah.
Okay. So was Vivasure the next thing after China, or?
No, I came to London. So Abbott asked me to come manage one of their businesses in 13 countries here in Europe. So I was there for about 5 years managing a P&L for their European business. Yeah.
Perfect. So where did you come across Vivasure for the first time?
So I came across Vivasure the first time when I got a phone call. I think I had heard of the product, but I hadn't actually heard of the company. And Vivasure called and said, look, we've commercialized our product, and we're now, want to go run a US pivotal. We want to really get to an exit. So some of the investors have been in there for quite some time, and they were trying to say, look, can you help us get to the finish line here? And that's how I heard about them. So I went and interviewed with the chairman and then some other board members, and actually got my offer a month after COVID started. And we had this conversation like, this is probably not the best time to start a new job. So I didn't start for several months later. But of course, because of all the travel restrictions, had to be introduced by Teams. And that was a bit awkward to be introduced to everybody by Teams when they're all like wearing masks. And but that's how I got introduced to Vivasure, was through a phone call.
Excellent. So what was the mandate when you first came into Vivasure? What were you initially brought in to do?
I was initially brought in to expand the commercialization, raise a Series D, and then go run a US pivotal. And really, they wanted us to get to an exit. So there were some investors who were like, look, can we just sell the company now for what it is? Other people are like, look, let's go, why can't we sell, 5, 10 million of euros of product? Why can't this get off the ground? So that was the initial mandate. The CEO at the time was the founder of the company, and he'd done a great job to get it there. But there was just a thought that, like, look, we need somebody with a bit more commercial experience and a bit more understanding of the U.S. Hey, why don't we bring in an American to go run a U.S. pivotal trial?
Okay. So how did that kind of dynamic work when you first came into the business?
Yeah, so it's always, I think it's a bit challenging sometimes for a CEO to come in when the current CEO or the previous CEO didn't want anyone new coming in, right? And we had a great chat and talk and say, look, we need to work together here. I think he got past the ego issues relatively quickly because I knew I needed him. I'm not an R&D guy. I'm not a manufacturing guy. That was his expertise. Let's focus on the task at hand and get going. And I think that took a bit of pressure off of him to just focus on what he's good at. When you're a CEO of a startup, you spend a lot of time fundraising, a lot of time selling. You spend a lot of time with customers. You got to be on the road. So I think to do all that and manage the R&D and manage the manufacturing, I think was challenging. So it was a good fit. But yeah, obviously at the beginning there was some awkward conversations and a bit of ego that had to be managed.
So you've got this mandate to do US pivotal trial, get to an exit, build out some commercial force. What did you see as the first things to do? You step into the company day one. Did you see and find what you expected? And then I guess what were the first steps that you take to start getting on that road?
Yeah, wow. Sometimes the board doesn't always tell you everything. That was one of the dynamics. Sat down with our CFO and he's like, we only have 2 months of cash. And I was like, I just left this comfy job at Abbott and we have no money. And he's like, yeah. So that was the first thing that, okay, well we have to solve that one very fast. Second thing was I started, it was very difficult in COVID, but I started seeing cases with the product. And it was clear to me the product, from my sales experience again, wasn't ready for prime time. It wasn't ready for mass scale. And so that was, there's 2 things I really had to do at the get-go. One was find money, and 2, tell the board that, the product has some challenges and we need to fix it. That didn't go over so well, but, at the end of the day, this is the nature of medical device innovation. I think for you to come up with a product concept, build it, get it to the clinic, and it'd be perfect the first time through is extremely naive, right? And you're going to go through multiple iterations, and you need to go through multiple iterations of the product. So the question is, how do you make those iterations as short as possible? How do you get it so that you can get the feedback quickly and learn? You don't want to wait a year before you get clinical data to come back, oh, now we've got a problem, right? Because time is money. And so that I was like, look, we got to make some changes here. This is some of the things that we're coming up against. We have to make a change. So we made one version of it, and that product was extremely better in terms of the challenges we were having. And that was the one that we went and ran the US pivotal on. And then we realized we could make a few more changes and get expanded indication with some more changes. And that was the one that became the next generation product that we're selling now. But the point being is you needed to make multiple generations of products to be successful and address the feedback that you get in the clinic. Yeah. As I told the guys many times, you do a lot of these preclinical experiments on pigs in our space, and whether it's pigs or sheep or rabbit or whatever. But I always said to them, look, we don't have pigs who eat bacon, right? Like these are healthy pigs. They don't have the anatomies that you have in humans where, calcified, atherosclerotic, all sorts of aging issues. And so, when you go into a healthy pig that's, not very old, maybe a year, and then suddenly you go into an 86-year-old woman, you're going to have a different feedback, right? And so the only way to really get that feedback is in the clinic, unfortunately. So anyways, to make a long story short, the two things I had to do, one was find some funding, and two was to, start on the path of fixing the product. And so this whole idea of, they had well, maybe you can go hire more sales reps, and maybe why don't we go run a pivotal? I just thought it was too risky to go do those things until the product was up to snuff. Yeah.
I'm interrupting this episode to bring you a word from our sponsors, TTP. TTP is a leader in complex medical technology development with deep scientific and engineering expertise. They support ambitious medtech companies in solving high-risk, high-complexity challenges where there's no margin for error. Whether you're tackling uncharted technical territory or racing to bring a product to market, TTP provide clarity and direction. By de-risking innovation and ensuring seamless alignment with regulatory and manufacturing demands, TTP help you move forward with speed and confidence. To find out more, check out the show notes. So where did you get that initial capital from? Because it takes a long time to fundraise.
So what we did was we convinced the obviously the current investors to put in another bridge, and then we were fortunate enough that we had one indication of our product that worked really well, and there was a strategic that indication was for, and we went to that strategic, and we said, "Hey, look, you interested in putting money in?" And they said, "Yeah, we're interested, but we want you to go run a trial." So we went and ran an EFS in the U.S. On that trial, but that trial did two things. One was it added a lot of credibility to the company. When you have a strategic come in and say, "Hey, we like this product, we want to invest in you guys." So we got that. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was really a credibility builder for external, as we went to go raise a Series D, but also credibility building with the current investors. Like, okay, there is something here, something that's legit that we can work with. And so that investment was a huge boost. And we started running the trial, built our KOL network. We started interacting with the FDA. So that EFS really gave us, I think, even though the trial itself, the results are fine, it's out there, it's not going to be game changing, but the actual process of running that trial. So we had to go get an IDE approval, which meant our interactions with the FDA really picked up. They took us seriously. We had to start building a KOL network in the US. So it was, I remember during those times when we were running the trial, still kind of COVID-esque era, you would get on a flight to the US and you'd be like one of 5 people on the BA flight. You really felt bad for those people because there's like no one flying. So we ran that trial, but that gave us a boost. And then I say in 2021 or so into 22, we were trying to raise our Series D. And like I said, in 2021, we had some term sheets from China. So in that fundraise process, we had hired some bankers really to help with Asia and finding money. Whenever I would call to the US, if we weren't some sort of health tech technology, people are like, yeah, not now. We're not interested in traditional medical devices. All this hot stuff is, people are getting unicorns in 2 years from this. So we're putting our money towards all of these innovative health tech companies. So there was no real interest for us. It's like now, if you'd put AI in your name, you probably would have gotten some sort of term sheet, right? Back then it was if you got, some sort of health tech or tech something, they would have been like, oh, okay, good, put money in. So yeah, we got some term sheets from, particularly from China. So my Chinese connections helped there. And it was interesting. Some of the Chinese investors are very Western, very sophisticated, use Western law firms. Others are very Chinese. And I remember being on a conference call with one company, a diligence call, and they had like 40 people on the call. And, it's one of those Zoom calls where it's just like all these little like Lego bricks and you don't know who's who, and no one puts their picture up. And someone, like some financial analyst says, oh, I noticed there was a 10,000 euro expense on this. And I'm like, I don't even know what, like, how am I supposed to answer that? Right. That was a crazy crazy diligence process. We sent devices to one company in China, and they were going to demonstrate them to clinicians and get the feedback. And we showed them how to use the device again over Zoom. And then they called us up a week later and said, "Oh yeah, we've put your device into a pig." Oh, okay. Yeah, and we got on the call, and they treated the pig femoral artery like a human femoral artery. Like, okay, well, just to be clear, a pig's on 4 legs, and they have all this muscle there. And by the way, their femoral artery is, typically about half the size of a human femoral artery. So this is and they're like, yeah, we occluded the artery with your device. And I'm like, yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, because, their device is meant for an 8mm vessel, not a 4mm vessel. Like you've got all this muscle and tissue, we're just kind of like, why didn't you call us? Like we could have told you how to run that experiment. They're like, yeah, we're not sure if we want to invest. And you were just like, shaking your head. Like this is not a process. So anyways, we had some term sheets. The board was excited. We're going down a path. And then that's, as I mentioned to you before, that's when Haemonetics called and said, hey, look, the Barcard Diva, it's going really well. Putting a large hole closure device in the bag of the team that's selling the small is just a natural fit and really fills out the portfolio. How can we partner? And that's when they said, how much do you need? I said, look, we needed 35 to 40. That's how we raised the Series D round. And they tranched it over time based upon certain activities. But really, the biggest piece of that was running a US pivotal.
Incredible. And with that process, so they come in at the Series D. Was that always to run an acquisition and to?
Yeah, they were insisted upon having exclusive option to buy us upon the certain milestones. So, really based upon when the PMA submission went into the FDA, that would trigger their option.
Okay, excellent. And so let's talk about that journey of working with Haemonetics through that process. So, like, they come in at the Series D, they've got expectations and things like that. Like, how did that dynamic work between Vivasure and Haemonetics?
I think it was really collaborative. They were on our board. So they were, in all the different board meetings, and they were, very much engaged with all the different activities we were doing. Times they could help with some KOLs, and introduce. So they were very collaborative and a part of the process. And as anything, you build timelines on how long it's going to take, and you do, figures on, okay, it's going to take us this long to enroll this many patients and get the pivotal enrolled. What we quickly found was, our trial was more difficult to enroll than we thought. And we didn't get CMS approval, which for the 2 other EFS studies we had run, we submitted approval for CMS. This is the reimbursement. They were approved within 1 month. And we submitted the exact same application to CMS, and it came back 3.5 months later, rejected without much, you couldn't understand the reason. They're like, we don't think you're running a health study. And we're like, what? This is, it didn't make any sense. And what ends up happening, a lot of hospitals, the vast majority of hospitals, if you don't have CMS approval, even if you're not charging for the product, they're like, well, we don't want to submit it to our IRB, or we don't want to contract, or we're afraid there might be some risk. And they start coming up with stuff which isn't true. Like, oh, well, what if I treat a Medicare patient and then something happens with your device? Then are they not going to pay for the whole procedure? Like, oh my gosh. So, these are the type of questions you started to get. And it took us almost a full year to get the approval from CMS, plus the dynamics of trying to roll it. So our timelines were pushed out a bit. And Haemonetics were very understanding, very supportive. They weren't, critical. They weren't ever looking to get out. They were like, look, okay, finish this thing, let's go. We're excited about it. And that delay, though, on the positive, there's always a positive and negative, that allowed the next generation product to really catch up to the point that we were able to submit that with the second product we had made in the PMA to the FDA. So they're very happy because they were more excited about the product that was in development than the product that we had run in the US pivotal.
So if you're submitting the exact same documentation and submission for CMS, why does it get rejected on a third time?
Yeah, so this is one of these things that you have expectations going into a trial, and you just have to be prepared that your assumptions are going to get blown up. Going into the trial, I thought IRBs would be very difficult. IRBs were super fast. I thought contracting would be a challenge. In some places it was a challenge, particularly around, hey, you're a European company, your insurance policy is in euros, we're in America, housing, things like that you would run into, but that wasn't actually that big of an issue. But the CMS one, I didn't think it was going to be an issue, and it became one. So why did it happen? Look, people change, dynamics change. There was new leadership at CMS. I think previously, I don't want to speak for them, but it was, I'm going to say there was less rigor, more of a rubber stamping on a lot of things they're going through. And they had a lot of new people that were being asked to take a harder look. And so they come across our study, which doesn't meet the very clear definition of what they're looking for. And they say, okay, no. And then you had to go back and forth with them. So I think it is important that anybody's running that study just to make sure that they're on top of that going forward. That would be an important lesson, yeah.
Very good. And a lot of the clinical data was actually coming from Europe. So just talk us through your European pathway regulatory-wise.
Yeah, so for the US pivotal, actually, I think you're speaking to this, the FDA was okay with you getting or enrolling about 50%, up to 50% of the patients in the US pivotal outside the US, right? So we had a few centers in Europe that had used the product previously, and we engaged with them. Here in Europe, I think it's become more rigorous. So we ran a lot of studies in Germany. Previously in Germany, the ethics and contracting, or I should say ethics and the competent authority approval were run in parallel. And now they made them sequential. In other words, you had to go get one before the other, which doubled the amount of time it took to get approval. So something that used to take 3 months to get approval now is taking 6 months. So you have this kind of dilemma. Well, those are the places we worked with before, but now we got to go through this whole process. There are many geographies that you can go to in Europe that were more than willing to run the trial, and you could get up and running quite quickly. The challenge started to become, you have to balance between, okay, do they have enough procedures? Because we were mostly closing transcatheter aortic valves. So, in Eastern Europe, there wasn't as many places. Like a big center there would do 100 a year. Well, big center in Germany does 1,000 a year, right? So you have these trade-offs between centers about where to go. So we did end up going to Germany primarily for the European trials. We did go to France. There's some great centers in France, but getting competent authority approval was a challenge in France, to be honest. I'll give you an example. They came back, one of the reviewers came back for a study and said, "We don't think your study should be in women." And I was like, what? And they wanted us to change the study to exclude women. I just thought, I was like, this is crazy. Like, what are you talking about? So we got through that. But
what was behind their reasoning for that?
I have no idea. We just kind of like rolled our eyes like, what? Because again, if you have people reviewing your study who don't know your space, then it adds to the uncertainty about what their questions are going to be. Like with CMS, the gentleman who was reviewing our study had a foundation in infectious diseases. What would he know about vascular closure or interventional cardiology? It's just, it's a push for them, right? We went to the Netherlands, it was very fast. Denmark was extremely fast. Some great centers there. And actually, people don't talk about this. One of the nice things about MDR, when it will come, is that if you get approval, one competent authority is good for all the countries. We were still having to go, every time we went to a new country, you'd have to go to a different competent authority, which is different application, different requirements. Sometimes things were on MDD standards, some were MDR, sometimes they're on both. Like it was just, each application was a bit of a pain. So every time I call, like, oh, why don't we do that country? The guys would be like, man, that's a brand new application. That's like more work for us. So we went to France, we went Germany with Netherlands, Denmark, and Ireland. Obviously, that was yeah.
So looking back at the Vivasure journey up to acquisition, again, I'm going to dive into the acquisition a little bit deeper, a little bit further on. What were the things looking back that were maybe the wrong direction at the time that if you were to go and do it again would maybe be a different step, or you'd make a different decision?
Oh, wow. I think, if we had known that it was going to take as long as it did to enroll the trial, I mean, it took 9 to 12 months longer than we anticipated. That would have made things a bit easier. I think also getting into it, you negotiate a deal with these option agreements are basically structured as you negotiate a deal several years before you actually will close the deal. So you have to think of all these contingencies along the way. And the complexity that starts to bring in, if this and that and that and this becomes really, really complicated. And especially if there was milestone or earnout, which our deal was, because the dynamics of those become really complicated. So in retrospect, I would not have made it so complex, because then you get down the line and like, well, not exactly this, but then there's that, and and the definitions people have are a bit fuzzy, and then then you're renegotiating everything, right? And so it's like, oh, here we go. So I would say that if you were going to do an option agreement, make it very clean and vanilla, and very simple as to what it is. You accomplish this, then there's one big payout, earnouts and structures and things like that. It hedges risk, but it also creates more complexity. And then those, things change, times change, dynamics change, right? And so what you thought at one point in time might be different another time. My advice would be, if you're going to do a structured deal, the end is very simple and very clear. The more you put like, well, if there's this and that and this, then it becomes more complex because things change, things move, right? And you don't want to be in a position where down the line that now you're renegotiating everything on that makes it very complicated. So I think sometimes we like those pieces because the acquirer likes them, it de-risks it a bit. On our side, it feels like, okay, if we do that, then we get this and that. But what ends up happening is, well, what if you kind of got there and you think you got there, but they didn't think you got there, and then you're in this kind of gray zone, and that's it's a very testy situation, right? So the cleaner you can make it, the simpler you can make it, and everyone's in agreement, the better. It helps a lot.
Very good. What was the trigger point of acquisition in terms of
the PMA submission?
Yeah. Okay. So it obviously took a little longer than the PMA submission to actually get acquired. So what did you have to work through from when PMA was submitted through to final acquisition?
Yeah. So this gets back to the acquirer, and I think I talked about this dynamics of when they're ready. They weren't quite ready when we submitted. They're like, well, okay, timing's not great. We want to do this and that. And kind of the time was now, right? So you had this interesting dynamic. Well, do you give them a bit more time to do what they need to do? Or do you try and blow the whole thing up and start over, right? So that was why it took a bit more time, is they weren't quite ready when we submitted to do the deal. So
you keep on executing up to the point of
you keep driving and keep pushing, and there was the submission, there's the next gen work. We went and got the CE mark for the next gen product. We started commercializing the next gen product. They had clinical trials for the next gen product, et cetera, that we had to keep driving. So yeah, I mean, you keep executing. Scaling up the manufacturing was another key piece. And there's a lot of projects and things that you always want to be doing, reducing COGS or simplifying the process, better contracts with your suppliers, things like that. Always things that you could be doing, right?
Yeah. So what was the moment when they turned around and said, yeah, we're now ready?
No, they gave us a timeline early last year when they said, okay, we're going to be ready about then. And then that started the process. But because of the complexity of our deal, a lot of different tax implications for all sorts of people, it took a lot This was a very complicated, messy deal. And we had a cap table that had a lot of people on it. So yeah, it just took a long time to get to the close.
So talk me through some of that complexity then. Like, how are you working all that out? Like, what was the kind of job that you saw as like, how do you start breaking that down for someone who's never been through that acquisition process before?
Yeah, so we were an Ireland-based company. In Ireland, they have a certain way of treating earnouts, tax-wise, that required a certain structure that you had to put in place. So that was one dynamic that had to be done for all the Irish investors, including the employees. So in our deal, every employee had an earnout. That was insistent upon that. So we had to get that done. Other pieces, when you have a very complicated cap table, there's a lot of parties involved. We had some government bodies that put money into the company, and government bodies sometimes can be, I would say in general, the ones who invest in us are really, really fast, but sometimes it can take some time to review the document. And then there was all these dynamics related to the actual earnout structure that we had negotiated years before, now all coming to fruition. And then you had to bake into the cap table on how it flowed. And then to make a long story short, it was a really complicated structure to work, and then get everybody, all the shareholders have to sign off. All these government bodies have to sign off. That takes time. So the more that you can do up front, in retrospect, if we could have gotten some of that stuff done years ago and cleaning it up, that would have helped. But hindsight's 2020, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And so when you're delivering all this, is it like keeping employees really well informed as you're going through this process, or are they kept quite?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they knew something was happening. They knew the release was going to happen. At some point, we told them this was happening. But obviously, you don't want to tell them, oh, there's some legal issue that's just popped up or that. Yeah. You don't want to get into all the details. So they knew it was happening. Obviously, we had a lot of people from Haemonetics over doing diligence, a lot of them coming to sit down. Some of them were even talking integration with our team beforehand, so people knew it was going to happen. And you kept them appraised as appropriate.
And so when you broke the news, like, what were the feelings from the guys there? Was it kind of joy and we're going to get paid out for this?
Yeah,
or
there's
was
a
it
bit of
apprehension?
joy.
Or
I think some people also were a bit, oh, okay, it's finally happened, because we had been years that they were invested in us, and people thought it was just around the corner. So there was a bit of both. I think I was surprised how many people came up and congratulated me as if I had done it. I mean, I was like, well, you guys did the work, but I think everyone was super excited about it, and just kind of looking forward to, okay, this what's next,
Very good. Very good. So is there anything else you want to talk about that might be useful to other people who have been on this journey or going on this journey that we haven't yet talked about?
Things that I would have wish I learned before. I think doing class 3 implantable medical devices is courageous. There's a lot of great innovations and technologies out there. I think a job of a CEO at the end of the day is a problem solver, right? And your job is to figure out, okay, what's the main problem now? Okay, how do we make this work, right? And don't come into a job and say, well, okay, I'm going to focus on this or that. You've got to find a way. And I think the story of Vivasure really is finding a way. The company is almost 15 years old, been through a lot over time, a lot of different versions, a lot of different technologies, a lot of setbacks, but just keep finding a way through all the different dynamics. The reason why they got money from the government is because they went, okay, we need money to keep things going, right? Went and got that money from Horizon 2020, went and got money from Enterprise Ireland, just to kind of keep things moving. And then we went and got some strategics to believe in us. And then we were able to keep the story going and funding the technology that took time. These things take time. And I think people always expect, just kind of go boom, 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 and then we're done. Right? And it's never like that. It is not a straight road. It's a winding road, and sometimes it's off road to get to where you want to get to. But you just got to keep finding a way and be the biggest cheerleader of the team along the way.
Awesome. So we're going to bring it round to a close. We're going to try something new, which is some quick fire questions just to kind of round it off and trial a new bit of format. So
Okay.
These may work, these may go in, these may not. But yeah, so what was the hardest no you had to give as a CEO at Vivasure?
We wanted to hire several sales reps and really put the foot on the pedal and drive this. And the answer was no, we can't. We gotta do with what we can. Generally, in medical devices, to get $1 million in sales, you gotta spend $1 million, right? And that's not too good from a financial return, particularly for venture investors. So, we had to say no to a lot of commercial things that we wanted to do.
Sure. What was the best advice that you ignored and were glad you ignored it?
I think the best advice that I ignored was there was recommendations to fire a whole bunch of people. And they were like, look, your cash burn is too high. Some of the board members said, your cash burn's too high. You got to get this down by half. In other words, like cut the team in half when I first came in. And, I ultimately made the decision it wasn't worth that. And you kept the talent, kept the people, and now it's really paying off that you kept them around. And I think it's very simple for a board member to say, yeah, I'll just go get rid of a whole bunch of people. But a lot of them are adding value. I think sometimes they don't appreciate the value they're adding. And there's a lot of know-how there that's quite essential. One of the things I would say, and this is critical, but like when I was at Abbott, there were 2 vetoes at Abbott to deals. One was legal, and the second was quality. And as your company scales, obviously the legal part, you got to have a good law firm and have the right type of spin, protect your IP. When you get to a series B or D, you got to be spending 100, 200,000 a year in IP, right? People don't think about that necessarily, but, and then have a proper law firm guiding you in your business structure and where you're going. But the quality side, I think that's the one that always tricks people. And the guys who started Vivasure, they came from Boston Scientific. They basically brought the Boston Scientific quality system in. It's a really cumbersome, big, heavy-duty quality system. But because it was there and everything was buttoned up, when we had acquirers come in, they're like, okay, good. We can integrate this very quickly. What they don't like is they come in, oh my God, we've got to implement this, we've got to do that, we've got to redo that process. Oh boy, that scares me. Those are the things that really big companies don't like, particularly the quality guys. So the quality guys come in and say, you don't have the right processes, structure, system in place, you're not going to get very far. So those pieces, having that, in other words, keeping that around as intact as we did, even though it was a bit of a pain and cost us some money, but when it came time to be acquired, we flew through that challenge.
What's one lesson you wish you knew early in your career?
I got this lesson from my one of my mentors. He says, but really it's don't be a jerk. Like to people, the team, you've got to get everybody on board. You've got to get the board on your side. You got to get the team on your side. I had founders who were like, well, who's this American coming in and telling me what to do? You have to get them on your side. Customers, we had a lot of problems with running the trials. We had a lot of problems with the product sometimes. And you know what? You need to go in there and be the one in the face and apologize, make it right, figure out what to do. And don't get arrogant. Don't be a jerk, really, to your people, your board, your customers. At the end of the day, people want to fight for you if you're a good guy.
That's a great way to end on. Andy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Congratulations to you and the Vivasure team on the exit.
Thank you. We're really proud.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Crux of MedTech podcast. If you're not already doing so, please go ahead and subscribe on YouTube or follow the podcast on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Crux. Crux is a medtech search firm which places pioneers in transformative roles to help us live longer, healthier lives. We do 3 things for companies. We help hire world-class executive talent. We help companies raise investment from Series A to Series C and execute upon M&A. And we also are building a community of medtech leaders to facilitate peer-to-peer learning and accelerate the companies to help them go faster.
If you're interested in any of those 3 things, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or follow the link in the show notes to find out more. Thank you.